So be very careful what you name and claim for yourself. Be humble. Remember, you're operating and you're auditioning before God for an eternal role. Make sure that your audition is done right. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Hi, and welcome to the Spiritual Christianity Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the biblical distinction between predestination and free will.
Going way, way up from here, from where I am to where I'm going. Going way, way up from here to who I am, from where I've been.
So what is the difference between predestination and free will? Now, there's a lot of tug of war in Christian doctrines about one or the other. And what happens is that people are comparing things, but are not using the same balance, are not using the same terms, they're not using the same weights, and therefore everything gets mixed up. So there's a lot of confusion between the two. And I'm hoping in this episode that we'll clear these things up. But to begin with, let's look at Romans 8, and I think in verse 29. Let's take a look at what it says in the Bible concerning predestination. And for that we read, For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. So what is the predestination about? Is it about salvation, as the Calvinists say? No. Salvation is not predetermined. Salvation is based on our what we do with what we've been given. In other words, salvation is a lot of it has to do with what we do, up to us, and to obey the commandments and to do what's right. Of course, I'm not talking about salvation from sin. That is only possible by entering into Christ, right? But here it says, those he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. It doesn't say predestined to be saved. I say this is a big difference here. See, the evangelical Christianity is so focused on salvation and being saved and getting saved. Everything is interpreted through the same lens. It's as if you're looking at anything is monochrome. Everything outside is red or everything outside is blue. There's no color contrast. There's no nuances. But to be conformed to the Son, what does that mean? It means to be conformed, first of all, in victory over sin, right? We're being conformed to Christ in purity, but also to the full stature of Christ. In other words, we are being conformed to the image of Christ in our character. In other words, in our maturity. So there's a purity aspect, which is a gift from God. It's by translation. It's by grace through faith. It's a gift, and that gift is purity, freedom from sin, not forgiveness, freedom from sin. And then the second step, which is to win Christ, right, is to go after the full stature of Christ, and that is to maintain a life at that level. In other words, to become mature and trained and vetted and accepted by God at that level. So we're seeing that there's two different things going on here with free will and with predestination. Now, God foreknew, it says, for whom he did foreknow. Now, do you think you would be able to keep secret those who are able or had the faith to be able to be translated into a higher walk in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom realm? Do you think that would be a secret from God, those who would be able to move on into becoming conformed to the image of Christ? I don't think so. God is God, right? He can see all things in the past. He can see all things in the future. God is not concerned at this point about who is saved and who isn't so much. That's our concern. God's concern is that we be conformed to the image of his Son. God is holy and he wants us to be holy. That's God's main concern, not just salvation. Again, God can save anyone. God can do anything, but he's looking for faith. He's looking for faith in the ones that he knows when they are given a chance will move on. They won't wilt and they won't fade and they won't become wishy-washy. They will hold to the course and they will stay the course until they finish the race. And they finish the race successfully. These, like I say, are not hidden from God, these people that do this. And that's why they are predestined. Now, once you are predestined, in other words, or once, it's not so much that you are predestined as an individual. You are following the predestination standard, which is the higher race. So it's not so much that a person is predestined as an individual. It's just that God knows which individual will follow the standard and will be successful, will be faithful, and will have faith, and will be able to stay the course. God just knows who those people are. The free will is given to us in that even if we don't make it to a higher walk, or we're not conformed to Christ, we're still only judged by what we did. We're not judged by our beliefs. We're judged by what we did. And what we did is up to us. We have the free will in the lower walk to do as we wish. We can pray, we can seek God, or we can have faith, or we can be faithless, we can be wishy-washy, we can do all these things based on our free will. Now, to go up and be translated into the higher realm, in other words, to walk as Jesus walked, is a gift from God. He gives that to those who ask him sincerely. It's a gift. He doesn't let everyone go up because not everyone is qualified or will. In other words, God will only let the person do something if they follow the right procedures, right? It says, remember, he even says to Cain, after he was trying to be approved of God, and he wasn't able to be. And he says, if you get it right, will I not also accept you? So in other words, this is not something of favoritism or God choosing one person willy-nilly over another. No, this is somebody God sees somebody who is faithful, striving, and is open to the impossible, open to God. And that person he allows to walk in the higher walk, at a higher level, right? At the level of the Spirit. Now, that doesn't mean that everything after that, there's no free will. There is free will. Of course, God is empowering a person at that point to walk in the Spirit and in the victory over sin. But there's still free will. You can still say no. You can always say no. God's a gentleman. He doesn't force anyone to do anything. In fact, as we see, look in the world, all the sin in the world. Is God really forcing people to do evil? No, it's our free will that causes us to do evil. We're not forced. However, at whatever level we are called at, we have free will on that level. The only thing we don't have free will, the only thing that is not predestined so much as it says here, as foreknown, is the jump that we have into a different realm. So in other words, whether we're walking under the law or under grace, at each level, there's free will. It's like baseball. I like using baseball terminology because obviously Jesus would have used baseball terminology had it been invented in those days. But since it's a more recent event to create baseball, we can use it now. So there's minor leagues and major leagues. In the minor leagues, you have free will, right? You have free will to practice your batting and practice your catching and practice your running and doing all those things on a minor league level, right? So this is like the idea of being under the law. Or if you are sent up to the major leagues, you still have the same free will and you're still doing the same things, so to speak, but at a different level. You're getting paid more, of course. So the idea is the only thing that is not in your control is whether you're in the minor leagues or the major leagues. And it's the same thing in the Christian life. In the Christian life, the only thing that you have choice over is to do something with what you've been given. To whom much is given, more is required. But to who is faithful in little is also faithful in much. You see, so the two different contrasts. So in other words, if God sees you in the minor leagues doing very well and seeking him and praying and being faithful and standing firm, well, he just might say, well, you know what? I could use you in a higher league and you're good for the team. In other words, God is thinking in the terms of victory over the devil. He's looking for a winning team. He's looking for people who are going to properly represent him in the kingdom race. He's going to look for people who will be his witnesses to the ends of the earth. So if we're doing well in the lower league, he might just translate us into the upper league, right? The major leagues, in order to be more effective on that level. But he knows that if a person is failing, he who is faithful in little is also not faithful in much. In fact, it may be even worse. Such a person might become full of pride, might start using his lack of faith in an even more drastic way. So God knows. That's why this idea of predestination is more the idea of God has certain people that he knows need to be at that level. He's looking for a bride. He's looking for people to be intimate with. And therefore, he predestines that a certain number of people will be there. Not necessarily those who will be. It's just that he foreknows those who will be. Now, another analogy we could use is that of a film, like doing a movie on a movie set. What's predestined is the plot. What's predestined is the shoot, okay? The movie is predestined. It's already written down. There's already even a script. But what's not determined are who plays what. Those things are done by auditioning. Those things are done by trying and seeing if the person is able to do it. How many movies start off with a leading star and he's not able to finish the movie? He's not able to complete it because either he's just not able to. He's not able to physically do it or whatever. He gets replaced by another actor. And we see that with Israel and the church. We see the same plot, but different actors. Remember the parable of the vineyard, where certain people were the vine dressers and the husbandmen were there, and they had the role, right, of producing fruit at this vineyard, but they were unfaithful. So God goes and gets a whole other cast, right, to do his will. And in a movie, if you can't make it as an actor or as a chief actor, well, maybe you can still be an extra. See, this is the thing, is that you don't have to be kicked off the movie completely. There is only one movie. It's God's movie. There is only one film that matters, and that's the one that God is doing with his people. So just because you can't get a leading role doesn't mean you're not on the set. You could still be an extra. You could still be a member of the crew. You don't have to be a star of the show. So if you're humble and you are able to make friends among the crew, then it looks a little bit more like Luke 16, doesn't it? With the unjust steward who is not able to be a steward anymore, but he's cast out of the stewardship, but he makes friends among the cast and crew so that he's able to stay in the movie, right? He's not kicked out or he's got to look for some other movie, which doesn't exist in this case. No, instead he changes his role and he humbles himself and realizes, okay, I can't be a principal actor in this movie, but maybe I can still help out somehow. Maybe I can be an assistant to the key grip. Maybe I can be a stand-in. Maybe I can be an extra. So if you're humble, then we don't necessarily have to be a victim, right? A victim of being cast out of the crew. Remember how many it says are cast away, right, from God's presence. It says, go away, I never knew you. But these are people who insist. They insist that they are great actors. We did wonderful things in your name, Lord. We were this and we were that. But there's no role for them. And he says, go away, I never knew you. You're not in the movie. But if they would be humble and say, Lord, I'll do anything. I'll do anything to stay in this movie. I'll sweep up after everyone. I'm sure there's a place that could be found. You see the difference between being predestined, so to speak, or foreknown, and using your free will, right, to get something and survive. This is where free will is important. I think the people who believe in predestination don't understand the free will they have and don't use it wisely. The wise use free will. Remember also the lady, the Phoenician woman that went up to Jesus, and she said, can you heal my daughter? And Jesus says, why should I give to the dogs what's meant for the children or meant for the sons? And she wisely, by free will, like it sounds like what Jesus saying was predestined, right? But the free will got her through by faith. She said, even the puppies eat what falls from the children's table. And she answered wisely. She said, just a little bit of something. She doesn't have to be the star of the show. She just has to get something. And the Lord is gracious, and he's kind and compassionate and merciful. And he says, your faith has made her well. In other words, she won't get it because she's a chosen one or she's chosen as a child of God, but she will get it because she humbled herself and she used her free will, right, to say the things that were necessary that are by faith. And this is what is acceptable to God. And Jesus was pleased to help her. You see how it is? He resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Are the proud and the humble by predestination? Of course not. They're by our free will. Exercise your free will wisely. Another aspect is that if you are selected and you are among the elect and walking in the Spirit, that there's certain things that you can actually do that are maybe not written in the script per se, but God allows it. You know, the same way that we can pray for things and God will give it to us, even though it might not be part of the script. So God, there's an allowance for free will in the sense of it says, ask what you will and I'll give it to you. It's not ask what you will that's in the script. No, there could be some I would say some flexibility on God's part, that it doesn't hurt the script to do this or to do that. And so we have freedom. The freedom is even inside of what has been predestined by God. There's still free will, but you have to operate by faith and by supplication, by asking the Lord, by asking, seeking, and knocking. And it says if you do those things, that God will respond. But if we do it by faith and it's part of his will and can be fit into the movie. How many movies there are, and how many really good producers and movie makers are there that take advantage of things that are spontaneous. And they'll say, whoa, that was a good scene. It wasn't in the script, but I'm going to keep it in. This happens all the time in the higher walk, because holiness has to do with our devotion to God, not necessarily by saying everything a certain way or doing everything exactly a certain way, but by being motivated, animated by the Spirit, so that we become co-producers with God, co-workers with God at that level, because we are given the freedom at that level to do what is right, and not right in our own eyes, but is right in submission to the will of God. In other words, we are given some leeway. We're not just robots. We're human beings, and we have spontaneous actions that seem to be spontaneous. But I would say that mainly God has known them. Or all of them, God has known them. When I say mainly, I mean that the movie can be sculpted and crafted in the moment, because God already foreknew what you would do. But again, foreknowing is not the same, and it doesn't impede or stop free will. If we do something with free will, God already knew we would do it, and it's either accepted or not. So the ones that are vetted, the ones that have been chosen, in other words, there is the elect, and we don't choose to be elected. God chooses the elect. But like I say, whether we are chosen to be an elect or not, to be among the elect, that's God's choice. But on both levels, whether we're not accepted or we are accepted, we still have free will. Remember, the Bible says, 2 Corinthians 5, it says, whether present or absent, we do all to be accepted by God. That's our free will. Now, I'm just going to read a few more verses, again, that narrow down this idea of predestination. In verse 30 of the same chapter of Romans 8, it says, moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called, and whom he called, he justified, and who he justified, he also glorified. Well, now we're looking at this in reverse, right? I've had people come up to me and say that they're already glorified because they already consider that they're predestined. And this is a backward way of thinking. This is not a good way of thinking at all. It just means that those that are born again, right? They're born, but they're destined to become an athlete. But in order to do that, they also have to grow up. They go to school, right? They have to mature. They learn how to speak. They learn how to walk. And then they learn how to run. And then out of all the people that know how to run, a few of them become athletes. All it means is that whoever is an athlete was also born, right? Whoever was an athlete also went to grade school. So what we're looking at here is that just because a person is born again or starts a race doesn't mean they're going to complete it, and it doesn't mean they're going to win. It doesn't mean just because that you're an actor that you're going to get the role, or you might get a bad role. You might become a villain in the movie without even knowing it. So this is the thing, is that God is wiser than we are. He knows what we're going to do, and we have to submit ourselves to his plan. He sees things. He knows us. He knows what we're going to do ahead of time. Let's not confuse that with our free will. We have the free will the whole way along. If we would just humble ourselves, we might find a place among the crew or among the cast. But like I say, the only thing that's not in our free will is at the level we're running. So in other words, whether we're selected to be on the track and field team or not is not up to us. To run and to practice and to train ourselves, that is up to us. But to be selected, to be on the track and field team, or to be in the movie, or to be in the major leagues, those things are not up to us. That's God's choice. And he calls those people the elect. But again, just because you're elect doesn't mean you'll be successful. Because in every movie, there's not just the actors that play good roles, there's also actors that play evil roles. And you can be sure that among the people that are trying to be elected or that are permitted into the higher walk, there's going to be some evil ones as well. Remember, there's just as many Cains as Abels. And don't forget that even among the 12, the few that followed Jesus that closely, there was still a Judas. So let's not forget the idea that just because you're in a certain realm or a certain place, having a certain experience, doesn't mean you're not going to be judged for every action and every thought. Now, we have a very revelatory expose here of being chosen or being predestined and all this stuff. In Ephesians 1, we'll start at verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ. Now, this is not the minor league. This is the major leagues, right? He's blessed us with every spiritual blessing in heavenly places. This is for a higher walk, a person who has been permitted or translated into the kingdom. Remember, it says, hath translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. This is the higher walk, okay? According as he has chosen us. Again, these are the chosen. In him, before the foundation of the world. Now, this sounds like he's chosen us specifically to be that. And no, he foreknows us, and we also have to meet the requirement, right? So he's chosen us who do these things, right? Who do the right things, who have faith, because it's by faith. It's not by grace, by chance, great, or by grace through willy-nilly. It's by grace through faith. We have to have the faith, right? That we should be holy. Again, is this the lower walk? No, we are selected beforehand for holiness, right? And without blame before him in love. So this is about the beloved. This is about the bride of Christ. The bride of Christ is known already to God. We don't know, because even if we're elevated into a high walk and have all spiritual blessing, we don't know that we have a good role in this. In other words, the fear of the Lord is always before us, right? We always have to stay humble. Now let's continue. Having predestinated us into the adoption of children by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. Right? It says, to the praise and the glory of his grace, wherein he has made us accepted in the beloved. Now, who makes us accepted in the beloved? God does, because it's being about made. But he didn't make us be faithful in the little. This is what has to be understood. He's not taking somebody who is useless, right, and making them accepted just willy-nilly. No, because even somebody who's in the higher walk, like the wicked the unjust steward, He is rejected after having walked in the high walk. Judas Iscariot is rejected after he has intimacy, an intimate walk, just as intimate as with the rest of the disciples. He is rejected afterwards. So it's something that you have to measure properly. We continue in verse 7. In whom we have redemption through his blood. My Bible says the forgiveness of sins. No, the freedom of sins according to the riches of his grace. So this idea is that we are chosen, right, to run a race of holiness. Be holy as the Father is holy. Be holy, for I am holy. And also being conformed to the image of his Son, not to salvation. So the whole idea of the Calvinistic idea that certain people are predisposed or chosen ahead of time to be saved, that's not it. You don't have to be in the higher walk or chosen or the bride of Christ to be saved. No, the bride rules over the nations with the Son. The saints rule over the nations in the next age. There's a lot more people saved. In fact, the majority of people who are saved are not chosen. They're not elected, and they're not even born again. You don't have to be born. It doesn't say, unless you are born again, you cannot be saved. That's an invention of the evangelical mind or the Calvinistic mind. But it's man-made. It doesn't say that. It says, unless you're born again, you cannot see the kingdom. When? Now. You can't see it because you don't have the spiritual faculty. You're not a spiritual person. And unless you're born again, you cannot enter the kingdom. You can't enter into the realm. You can't. But it doesn't say that everyone who is born again will. It's like saying, if you're not born as a human, you cannot be an athlete, right? Unless you are born of the flesh, you cannot be an athlete. It doesn't mean that everybody that's born of a woman or born of the flesh is an athlete. This is what has to be understood. You have to compare like with like and not make hyperbolic or crazy leaps of logic just because it says something in the Bible without tempering it with other verses. It's a popular thing to think, well, if you're not born again, well, you're going to hell. It doesn't say that in the Bible. It doesn't say all who are unspiritual will be cast into the lake of fire. It doesn't say that. It's about doing wickedness. Not everybody in the minor leagues it's like saying anybody who's not in the major leagues doesn't play baseball and can't make a living playing baseball. It's not true. More people are in the minor leagues than there are in the major leagues. And they're all professionals. And they're all making money to play baseball. It's just that they're making less money. It's the same idea in the kingdom. In the kingdom, there are many different ranks, right? There are vessels of honor, vessels of dishonor. There are those that are ruling over you, and there's those that are being ruled over, right? And those that are ruling. So it's a big kingdom. It's a vast kingdom. And you can't just take one aspect or one teaching and make it a zero-sum game or a zero-sum idea. You can't do that. You have to put things into perspective and into proper balance. So, are you born again? If you are, then you're part of the race of faith. God has given you a sample. You want to be elected? Being born again is not enough. To be elected, you have to be a little bit more than that. Are you chosen? Not necessarily. Are you called? Yes. If you're born again, you are among the called. But it says, many are called, but few are chosen. It's just like the Israelites. They were all Israelites, but did God select them all? It says, not all who are Israel who are of Israel. In other words, it's a remnant. It's the same with us. God will call people into the higher race by giving them a spiritual birth, birthing them in the Spirit. But it doesn't mean having begun in the Spirit, Paul says. Are you now made perfect by the flesh? You've fallen from grace. And this was the Galatians. But how many more of us do that today with all the false teachings and the false understandings and the skewed perspectives and I would say all the different doctrines that cause us to fall away from the race? No, just because we begin a certain way doesn't mean we'll continue that way. Many are called, many are born again. Few attain to the full stature of Christ. And we should recognize that. Look around in the world. How many people do you see that are just like Jesus in their maturity, in their love, in everything, in every way, their purity? Not many. In fact, some people would say it's impossible. But the Bible, faith is about doing the impossible. If it was possible, no faith is required. It is about faith. And if you don't think it's possible, then you don't have faith. Because with Christ, everything is possible. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And with God, nothing shall be impossible. It says, it sounds impossible, the disciples said. Yeah, for men, but with God, all things are possible. So we've said that the standard of Christ, the higher walk, is predestined. And those that are allowed to go up into that realm, right, are foreknown of God, right? And they're part of a race that God is hoping that by free will you're going to do the right thing. Through much tribulation we enter the kingdom. We enter the kingdom. In other words, through trials and tribulations we are tested, vetted to make sure that we're solid and that we are able to be chosen, okay, among the chosen ones that are part of the bride, right? That are accepted in the beloved. But now let's look at the idea of accepted in the beloved is for the bride. But what about the ones who are not allowed to go up? What about the ones who are not given, like say, the chance to be among the called into holiness? Because the called and the chosen are into holiness. What if you're not even able to do that? Remember, Jesus says, many will strive to enter, but be unable. Does he say, because I'm not going to let them? No, it says you are unable. Why are they unable? Because they're using their free will improperly. Remember, God says, if you do it right, will I not accept you? The doing it right is the free will. If you play ball well in the minor leagues, will you not maybe get a chance to play in the major leagues? Do what's on you to do and let God decide whom he selects, right? So then who are the people then that are not among the selected ones or the called ones into the kingdom walk? Are they going to hell? Of course not. They can be faithful at their level. There are many good players in the minor leagues. They're just not good enough to be in the major leagues, right? There's many good players. And they do very well in the minor leagues, but they wilt under the pressure. And they wilt under the attention of so many people watching. And that kind of responsibility, they're not able to do it. And there's many more of those than those that are able to do it, right? And that's why they're called stars, and that's why there's a hall of fame, right, for the major leagues, but there's no hall of fame for the minor leagues. So who are they in the minor leagues? Where they're the guests. It says, remember, it says, go into the highways and byways and go get people both bad and good. You don't even have to have a high standard to be a guest. You just have to believe in Jesus, and you just have to be humble and God-fearing. And then you have a place among the guests. And again, remember the unjust steward was kicked out of his high place of being a steward of his master. But he found a place among the righteous, right? It says, and they will receive me into their homes, into their everlasting abode. These things are not understood but in the modern church. They're not understood. What it means is, if you can't walk in the Spirit, or God is not allowing you to walk in victory over sin, in holiness, in intimacy with God, in Zion, if he's not allowing you to do that, don't despair. Walk instead as a faithful guest. Even if you're bad and good, even if you're mixed, even if you're uncrucified, even if you have mixed motives, it doesn't matter as long as you're humble and you fear God and you admit to those things. Remember the righteous man, he was a publican, and he beat his chest and he says, woe is me, a sinner. And Jesus says, that man went home justified. Justified. Was he justified into a higher walk? Was he now chosen of God to be the bride? Of course not. He was only justified as a guest. So God will allow him into the great ballroom or the great supper because he's humble. because he repents, because he has the fear of the Lord. It says he was so ashamed of himself, he couldn't even look up to heaven. He couldn't even look up to heaven. And God says, okay, this man is righteous at his level. He recognizes his own sin. He recognizes his unworthiness, which makes him, ironically, justified. It's not the justification of life. It's not the justification of a saint. It's the justification of a sinner. And the modern church wants to have that kind of justification of a sinner in the higher walk. It doesn't work like that. You can't choose to be the elect. You can't read the Bible and decide you're an elect. You can't do that. You can't go to the New York Yankees or the Toronto Blue Jays and decide to play in the major leagues. It doesn't work like that. You have to try out for any level of baseball. You have to try out. There's tryouts for those things. It's the same thing with God. You have to prove yourself either as a guest, which is very easy to do, or as a saint of one who would be elected, which is very, very hard. Even to be selected to run that race is a high calling. Paul calls it the high calling. Of course, people don't like to think of it that way. But Paul, he said, I count all things as dung that I may win Christ. Paul is after the major leagues. Paul is after not just getting by. He's not after being a guest. He's after being a member of the bride among the beloved. And that's what he was selected for. And that's what he was called to be. But notice how he's afraid. He says, I fear lest after having begun, or I start my race, that I would be disqualified after having preached to many, right? He'll say that he runs the race and he buffets his body so that he doesn't lose. And how does he do these things? By free will. He disciplines himself, and he's diligent in his seeking, because he knows that even though he's been selected to run in a race, but he says many run the race, but one wins the prize. And same as the actors, many try out for a role, but one is selected for the role. So I don't mean to discourage people from striving to enter into the narrow way and striving to enter the kingdom. What I am trying to wake people up to is this false claiming and assuming and presuming that one is in something that one is not. In other words, if you're not walking in victory over sin, if you're not full of joy and peace and light, doing things that are impossible for humans, then assume that you're a guest and take that seriously. Do your role as a guest humbly and with the fear of God. Perhaps, remember it says, perhaps he will hide you on the day of judgment. In other words, you'll be able to remain a guest. But even perhaps that God will call you up into the higher walk of faith. He will call you up, perhaps, into the major leagues. Maybe. But if not, like I say, don't despair. Be humble. Be God-fearing. You don't know what it takes to succeed at that level. You have to let go of your life. Anybody who seeks to gain his life or to preserve his life will lose it. It says, if you're my disciple, you have to hate everything else. It's a very difficult calling. Even among the called, it's a very difficult calling, right? You're called to be a disciple. But read what Jesus says about the cost of being a disciple and see if you really are fulfilling that, fulfilling the conditions before you start claiming that you are something that you're not. Be careful. A lot of people are going to be rejected from the movie set because they claim to be an actor and they're not in the script and no one knows them on set. Okay? Be very careful. And those people that are so rejected are not going to go back down and be among the spectators. They're going to be cast out completely. So be very careful what you name and claim for yourself. Be humble. Remember, you're operating and you're auditioning before God for an eternal role. Make sure that your audition is done right. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So in summary, what is the difference between predestination and free will? Well, predestination means that there is a place to go, Okay, there's a place to go that is the higher walk, that is to be chosen and, or sorry, called and chosen. That some people are chosen. There's many called, few chosen, but there are the chosen among us. In the human race, there are people who will be conformed to the image of Christ. So that's predestination. The predestination is literally a destination. Okay, it's not certain people that are only those people are allowed to do it. It's not like God doesn't have any favorites in the world. He judges us without partiality and not according to. He doesn't look at us. He doesn't have any, I would say, predetermined favorites. No, but he watches how we are. He watches how we are and what we do. And I would say that, yes, going into the higher race is by foreknowledge and by predestination, right? Because such a walk exists. But on either level, whether you are selected or not selected, you're still operating in your free will. The only thing that is out of your control is being called up into the higher realm. In other words, it's for God to answer. It says, seek first the kingdom. It doesn't say that everyone who seeks will find, even though it says seek and you will find. It says many will seek to enter in and be unable. That's why you can't just take one verse and throw out every other possibility. People do this all the time. They'll say, there is none righteous, no, not one. And then completely ignore the fact that there's many, many righteous that are talked about in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they throw it away and they say it means something else. It doesn't mean righteous anymore because they've gone down a one-track mind. Be very careful to keep a balanced mind and not allow one verse to throw you off of 10 other verses that say the very opposite. Don't draw quick conclusions. Instead, look at truth in balance. There is predestination, but there's also free will. And you will be selected or not selected. I mean, as a successful candidate on either level, if you use your free will correctly. Remember what he said to Cain, what God said to Cain. If you get it right, will you not also be accepted? And as Paul said, whether we are present with the Lord in the higher walk or absent from him in the lower walk, let us do all to be accepted by God. Accepted. How are we accepted? Well, no matter what race, what level of the race you're at, you're doing it diligently by faith, and you're doing it with humility and the fear of the Lord. That's all for this time. Until next time. And if you're new to the channel, consider liking, subscribing, sharing your thoughts below, and please share with others. As you see, there's not very many subscribers and not many people watching because I'm challenging people to what actually counts, away from the indoctrination, away from the dogmatism and the ideologies that men love. But I'm giving you pointers and hopefully exhortation so that you will run to win and that you'll be successful, because this is a spiritual message I'm giving you. The Bible is spiritual in nature, and there's very few people that are able to understand and to accept spiritual things. Remember, it says the carnal mind does not accept spiritual things, but a spiritual man judges all things, but he's not judged of anyone because they don't understand the levels, right? So until next time, Oz Vehadar, strength and honor.
We win from